And so what's the distinction between listening to something religious as entertainment, and listening to something religious as a religious activity, i.e. something that will draw us near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that we are trying to change, trying to find something we can apply. So something we are accepting the fact that we're not perfect, there's something off in our lives, and we're trying to change that. So that's a definition that makes something a religious activity, as opposed to just merely entertainment. And so if you just focus on that for a second. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bifadlika ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So welcome to this course on the works of Ramadan, which is a summary of a hadith concerning fasting, reciting the Qur'an and spending on others, from Al-Hafidh Mundhiri's collection of hadith, Targhib wa Tarhib. And so today we're looking at the merit of fasting. And on our first hadith, it's narrated by Abu Hurairah, may Allah be well pleased with him, that the Prophet ﷺ said, قال الله عز وجل, Allah Almighty Majestic has said, كل عمل ابن آدم له, all of the works of the son of Adam are for him. إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به. It says, save but fasting, for it is mine and I recompense for it. So fasting is a very, very special thing, and this is why it has, just like all prayers have all acts of worship have something special about them. For Hajj is something special, prayer is something special, fasting is something special. All of these have their own special angles. And so if we look at any actions, we can have tangible actions, doing something, and often those things have tangible rewards. You do this thing and you will get this thing. There is to some extent a physicality, a materialistic side to it, right? A basic, palpable side to it, tangible side to it. But there are many actions that are intangible. You can't actually grasp them. Moral actions that you do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you can't grasp. They're not measurable. So you can say this person didn't eat, he didn't drink, or he ate or he drank. He put his head on the floor, he didn't put his head on the floor. These are tangible things. But how can you measure sacrifice? How can you measure love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can you measure the joy of a person, the joy they find in their Lord? Right? And so when you have these very intangible actions, the rewards are intangible, and that's why, and Allah knows best, the Prophet ﷺ quoted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hadith Qudsi saying that the fasting is for me, something very special directly for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because it's an intangible action, its reward cannot really be expressed. And if we look at many of the the acts of worship that we are, that Islam teaches us to do, these actions have different effects on the heart. Some of them fill the heart, turn the heart to Allah, fill the heart with Allah. So prayer, for example, you are turning yourself to Allah, right? Whereas fasting, you're turning yourself away from other than Allah. So one, so to speak, is this thing to fill the heart, actively fill the heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing is to empty the heart of something else in order for the love of Allah to take place. Right? And some of them are both. Hajj, for example, leaving something and going to something else is both at the same time. Right? Zakah usually will be emptying. You have your love for money and you give that up. You're actively ripping that away, that attachment away, so that you can, there's place for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart. And so Allah knows best. This is the reward for emptying your heart for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah Himself, i.e. having a heart filled with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then the hadith continues, it says, fasting is a shield. If one of you is fasting, let him not say any lewd words or raise his voice. So its hadith continues, وَالصِّيَامُ جُنَّةٌ فَإِذَا كَانَ يَوْمُ صَوْمِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَلَا يَرْفُثْ وَلَا يَصْخَبْ فإن سابه أحد أو قاتله فليقل, and that's the next part. It says, he says, فإن سابه أحد أو قاتله فليقل إني صائم إني صائم. So should anyone try to argue with him or try to fight him, let him say, hey, I'm fasting, I'm fasting. Right? And so what does it mean? It means fasting assumes a certain attitude and a certain way of carrying yourself that is requires a certain way of doing things, not looking at certain things, not talking about certain things, not dealing with other people in certain inappropriate ways. And the hadith continues, says, وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ, I swear by him in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, لَخَلُوفُ فَمِ الصَّائِمِ, the change of the mouth of the bad breath of a fasting person is more beloved in Allah's eyes than the scent of musk. أطيب عند الله, أطيب, that's not the better translation would be to say is nicer, not more beloved. أطيب is sweeter in Allah's eyes من المسك, من ريح المسك, than the scent of musk. Then it says للصائم فرحتان, the fasting person has two joys. يفرحها, that which he rejoices. إذا أفطر فرح بفطره, a joy when he breaks his fast. وإذا لقي ربه فرح بصومه, and the joy because of his fast itself when he meets his Lord. And this is in Bukhari and Muslim. And the words here are the words of Imam Bukhari, narrated of the narrators of Bukhari, in the way that wording. And our next hadith is the same hadith but a different version. This is one of the useful things with Imam Muslim, is Imam Muslim in his chapter will narrate the hadith with various different chains, and you find that the narrators they didn't narrate it all in the same way. There's not inaccuracies, but the Prophet ﷺ used certain words, and those people narrating from here, this is from Abu Hurairah, narrated slightly different words here and there. Right, so it's the same meaning, but maybe changed the order slightly, or they or changed the phrase slightly, or they added one thing, or they didn't mention everything. So sometimes they'll mention a certain fact, a certain point of detail that's not in the other one. So it's not a contradiction, but it's just an extra detail that someone else didn't add. It says, وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ لِمُسْلِمٍ, in one of the narrations of Imam Muslim, it says, كُلُّ عَمَلِ ابْنِ آدَمَ يُضَاعَفُ. He says, every action of the son of Adam is multiplied many times. الْحَسَنَةُ بِعَشْرِ أَمْثَالِهَا. Every deed is rewarded 10 إِلَى 700 ضِعْفٍ, to 700 times in its actual worth, right, of the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِلَّا الصَّوْمَ فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, except for fasting, because it is for me and I recompense for it. Why? يَدَعُ شَهْوَتَهُ وَطَعَامَهُ مِنْ أَجْلِي, because he leaves off his lust and food for my sake. And it says, and then it says, as mentioned in the other narration, لِلصَّائِمِ فَرْحَتَانِ فَرْحَةٌ عِنْدَ فِطْرِهِ وَفَرْحَةٌ عِنْدَ لِقَاءِ رَبِّهِ. And a fasting person has two joys, a joy when he breaks his fast and a joy when he meets his Lord. And so this joy when you're breaking your fast is of two types as well. In reality is of two types. The joy of eating, right, and the joy of enjoying something that Allah loves from one. So Allah loves that you eat now, and so you're physically enjoying it, and it's spiritually enjoying it. And it says the bad breath, the typo here, breathe, type of bad breath. Khuluf is the change, khaluf is the different smell. So khuluf or khaluf. Khuluf is the change, and khaluf is the different breath itself. The bad breath of a fasting person is actually more beloved in Allah's eyes than the scent of musk. And again, atyab, better translation, not more beloved, but is sweeter in Allah's eyes. So what does it mean? Opposites. So how often do we find things are the opposite of how we perceive them? Right? We perceive something as bad. This is a bad smell, but in Allah's eyes it's sweet. We see something as a loss, right? Charity is actually a gain. And another hadith, and you can see here if you're following the numbers in the Arabic, I'm skipping, I'm not reading the whole book. عن سهل بن سعد رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, from Sahal ibn Sa'd الساعدي, may Allah be well pleased with him, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, إن في الجنة بابا يقال له الريان. Indeed, in paradise there is a door called the quenched one. يدخل منه الصائمون يوم القيامة, from which those who used to fast will enter on the day of rising. لا يدخل منه أحد غيرهم, no one will enter save them. فإذا دخلوا أغلق فلم يدخل منه أحد. And says, and once they have entered, it will be closed, and no one else will enter. So it's a very, very special thing. It's rated by Bukhari, Muslim, Nasa'i, and Tirmidhi. It's a very, very special thing. And so, inshallah, we hope that it says, as-sa'imun, who are the sa'imun? Are those people who fasted a lot all the time? Or those people who just fasted Ramadan? Inshallah, it includes anybody who fasted, even if they didn't manage to do the nawafil, the extra fasts throughout the year. The next hadith, عن عثمان بن أبي العاص رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. So this is Uthman ibn Abi al-As, that he, may Allah be pleased with him, that he said, I heard the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم say, الصيام جنة من النار كجن أحدكم من القتال. He says, fasting shields one from the hellfire, just like your shields shield you in battle. وصيام حسنة ثلاثة أيام من كل شهر. Says, and a good fast is to fast 3 days per month. This is rated by Ibn Khuzaymah in his Sahih Ibn Khuzaymah. So what is it? The thing that blocks off the hellfire, right? Protects one from the hellfire. And so this is on two levels. One is that one saves one from the hellfire from one's sins, but also stops one from sinning to begin with. Right? This is the nature of ibadah, is that ibadah helps one. So if you're struggling with a sin, work as hard as you can to get rid of that sin, and don't lean on anything else, but also do other acts of worship, give charity, make dua, try and do some other good deeds that will also help you get rid of that sin. And from Mu'adh ibn Jabal رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, just noted from Mu'adh ibn Jabal that the Prophet said to him, ألا أدلك على أبواب الخير, shall I not tell you how to attain all good? قلت بلى يا رسول الله. I said, of course, O Messenger of Allah. قال الصوم جنة والصدقة تطفئ الخطيئة كما يطفئ الماء النار. He says, fasting is a shield. It protects you from sin and protects you from the hellfire, and charity puts out sin like water puts out fire. Right, so giving charity as well. This is, we're mentioning this here. We're going to mention hadith specifically on charity in this course, because of the connection it has to the importance and the intimate tie it has with Ramadan. رواه الترمذي في حديثه وصححه. Right, and it's in Tirmidhi. And he mentions that this is part of a longer hadith, which he mentions it's going to mention in Bab as-Samt, in another part of the book where he talks about silence. And that's another part of important thing of Ramadan. We don't have time to go over that as well in this course, but silence as well is important in fasting, right? Because why we talk too much generally. Right? We generally talk too much. Right? And so when I say silence, meaning silence from speaking and silence from typing and silence from the iPhone, right? Non-stop checking, just like turn off the screen, looking away from the screen, just be quiet, right? So back in the day, you didn't have an iPhone, didn't have a computer. You speak to people, right? Now the problem is we don't speak to people. So but that's not the point. The point is turning off stimuli and turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then two companions, عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنه عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, it's narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be well pleased with both father and son, that he said, قال الصيام والقرآن يشفعان للعبد يوم القيامة. He says, fasting and reciting the Qur'an will intercede for the slave on the day of rising. So this is again, it goes hand in hand with Ramadan, reciting Qur'an. It says, fasting will say, "O my Lord, I stopped him from eating and fulfilling his lust, so accept my intercession on his behalf." Right? Forgive him. And there's other hadith that mention that actually the Qur'an will actually, you'll be falling into the hellfire and the Qur'an will actually come and save you. Right? So your recital of the Qur'an will take on bodily form and actually physically save you. And this is quite an important thing to understand, is that we often might look at rituals in religions and think about what those rituals represent. Okay, what does, for example, I don't know, Lent represent to Christians? What does the Passover represent to, etc. In Islam, obviously these rites, rites, represent things, but that's not really the main thing, because they are real and they are doing something. And these rituals like wudu, like prayer, like fasting, like zakah, they have physical manifestations in another realm. Right? We don't see what's happening to the sins. We don't see the physical representation of the sins, but they're there. We don't see them when we make wudu when they're going away. We don't see what's happening when you give charity. Right? We can't measure the temperature of the hellfire that we're about to get thrown into. May Allah protect us all. We can't see these things, but there is a physical or actual reality. It's not just something that represents something. Right? It's reality. Right? So it's of just so just like putting boiling water on a tea bag, it does something. Similarly, fasting does something. You can't see it, but it's physically happening. There's a physical reality to it. So it says, fasting will say, "Oh my Lord, I stopped him from eating and fulfilling his lust, so accept my intercession on his behalf." And then it says, ويقول القرآن منعته النوم بالليل فشفعني فيه. And the Qur'an will say, "I stopped him from sleeping at night, so accept my intercession on his behalf." قال فيشفعاني. And the Prophet said, thus they will intercede. And this is narrated by Imam Ahmad, Tabarani, Ibn Abi Dunya, and Al-Hakim. So Ibn Abi Dunya, he has many nice works on this kind of thing. He has a book specifically on samt, on silence, and many works, Ibn Abi Dunya. Our last hadith is from An Salama ibn Qaysar, and others have narrated it Salama, different wording of the name, different way of saying the name. Radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man sama yawman ibtigha'a wajhi Allahi," whoever fasts even just one day purely for the sake of Allah Himself, ba'adahu Allah min jahannam, Allah will distance him from hellfire, كَبُعْدِ غَرَابٍ طَارَ وَهُوَ فَرْخٌ حَتَّى مَاتَ هَرِمًا. He says Allah will distance him from the hellfire as far as a crow could fly from its infancy to its old age. So I just looked up before I recorded this. A crow can live for about, I think, something like 15 years. Right? I think American crow is slightly less, but something like 15-20 years. It's quite an amazing animal. Right? And so it means that when it gets really old, this crow got to as old as it could get, mashallah, it flew from its infancy all that time, that distance. That's what you're fasting one day. It's narrated by Abu Ya'la in his Musnad and others as well. And there's a little mistake here in my print, or this copy of the work. It says haraman. It's not completely wrong to say haraman, but many of the ulama, they mention it hariman, right? So haraman fatha means decrepitude. Haram is decrepitude, being very, very old and frail and not being able to move properly, etc. Haram, right? Harim is somebody who is old, right? And so Tibi and others, they'll mention that this is a hal, this is an adverb describing the bird, right? So it's being very old, hariman, and not haraman. Okay, and so that was our first lesson. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.